right, well, welcome back, everyone. Our next session will examine what it will take for the companies that make up the core economy, for example, engineering and construction firms, to remain relevant and competitive in the future. So with that, I don't know, I'm going to turn it right back over to Mr. Sensini to start us off. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just briefly, before we go to that, if you don't mind, one subject that we alluded to, we didn't touch on, was the impact on education of all of this. And we do have a very brief video that we thought we might run on that. Can we have that, please?
On jobs and the fourth industrial revolution. My name is Sadia Zahidi. I manage the forum's work on education, gender, and employment. Welcome. Welcome also to our two speakers today. Erik Brynjolfsson is director of the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy at MIT Sloan School of Management and co-author of The Second Machine Age. And Suzanne Fortier is principal and vice chancellor of McGill University in Canada. Welcome to both of you. What do you think will happen in the next 5 years in particular, and then out into the longer future?
Well, I think our radars are really giving us the right signal. We're going to see quite a large number of jobs disappearing or changing significantly. Obviously, a lower skills job initially. But with the increased capacity of sensorial capacity of many of the algorithms right now, we're going to see even a higher skill job in the future disappearing. I must say, I think our radars have been giving us the right signals, at least for the short term. And maybe what is most surprising is that we haven't acted as rapidly as we should have, because we certainly could see it coming. I had the opportunity last summer to visit a car plant, the BMW, and it's impressive to see all the robotics. And of course, you know, all the jobs have changed there in the car industry. So we knew that it was coming. I think we're fairly good at predicting 3, 4, 5 years ahead. It's the long term that is really the tough one for me.
Tell us a little bit about the long term.
Well, I think, you know, I'm the head of a university. We have students arriving at our university. They'll graduate in 4 years for their first degree. So 5 years is short term for me. What I need to think about is, what is the learning experience they must have to be prepared for the world ahead, a world that we cannot even predict yet. So it's not a matter for us to have students who are job ready. They have to be future ready. And we need to think about that, because it is going to be part of their lives.
So if you were to think about a change that you would want to make, looking out into the future at your university, or what you would broadly recommend to institutions of higher education, what would that be?
Well, what I think we are doing, and what many universities are doing, is including different modes of learning. Learning experience. So, and it is important to have some modes that are really in deep learning for our students, deep reflection, modes that nurture their creativity, entrepreneurial innovation. But it is also important, and our students demand that today, that they have the ability to use right from day one what they're learning. And that is often what triggers their own creativity and innovation. So it is a matter of integrating different modes of learning, right, and putting them also in that digital world of the future, which is now in our campuses, in our laboratories. The fourth industrial revolution is not tomorrow. It is in the laboratories of our university. We can show students what it looks like.
Okay, so that's universities. Not everyone goes to university. And of course, Erik, you already mentioned lifelong learning. So how do we need to put in place broader reforms to education systems, and who needs to do it?
Yeah, I think we certainly need greater investment in education, but more fundamentally, we need to reinvent how education is done. The sad reality is much of our education today, and I speak as an educator myself, is really geared towards an industrial economy. We have people sit in rows of desks quietly and say, please follow the instructions, don't get out of sync with everyone else, memorize these facts. But let's face it, following instructions, memorizing facts, that's what machines do well. What humans have a comparative advantage in is in a couple of areas. Let me highlight them. One is in creativity and thinking outside of the box, large-scale problem solving. And the second is in interpersonal relations, emotional intelligence, connecting with other people. Right now, our universities don't do much to foster those. I think they are teachable skills, teamwork. We certainly try to teach creativity and entrepreneurship at MIT. We also have something called Charm School. I don't know how well it works to try to teach some of the interpersonal skills. We need it, we certainly do. I think that there's going to have to be a reinvention. And actually, I think that machine learning and artificial intelligence can help with this. We can develop skills maps of the kinds of skills that are in the economy today, the kinds that are being demanded by employers and we think will be demanded going forward, and a mapping from one to the other so that we can do that. And machine learning can help speed that up. I was talking to some of the people like Andrew Wang and Sebastian Thrun that have developed the leading courses in these areas or programs in these areas, and they think we could get a 5x or 10x improvement in shifting the skill mix in the economy.
Great, thank you for that. I think we'll go right into our next major subject, which is really rethinking core economies. And we begin with a video on that, and then turn it over to Jimmy.
Infrastructure provides the foundation for our global society to operate and thrive. But we're living in a dynamic era in which that foundation is being challenged with political, socioeconomic, climate, and environmental shifts. It's time to rethink the way that we deliver infrastructure. Cities will expand with an influx of 975 million new inhabitants by 2025. By 2025, 1 billion people will enter the global consuming class. And 230 of the Fortune Global 500 companies will be based in the emerging world. By 2030, McKinsey estimates that $57 trillion will be needed to build and renew infrastructure. In a time of austerity, the world needs investment to rise from 2.6 to over $4 trillion a year. Governments are struggling to respond to these infrastructure challenges. With the right approach, it is possible to save $1 trillion a year. We're already seeing this change happen. South Korea saved 35% of its infrastructure budget through improved project selection. Over a decade of London congestion charging delivered 0% increase in traffic density, while generating $4.4 billion. Using modular techniques, a 30-story hotel was built in just 15 days. Using an innovative total cost of ownership informed approach, Denmark reduced road maintenance costs by 20%. Today, we meet to ask ourselves, what are the practical, pragmatic, and implementable solutions to this challenge? Together, we can build a foundation to support a world of 9 billion people.
Thanks so much, everyone. So I think that video is helpful in that it paints a slightly different picture. As I talked about earlier, there are micro elements of innovation where I think it may even be a bit jarring as we shift from the discussion this morning to the one we're about to have right now. In a world where there is that much demand for infrastructure globally, and when we say infrastructure, it could be something in the private sector, a new manufacturing plant, something in the public sector, a new bridge, affordable housing, a couple of big high-profile projects here in California, the water project or the high-speed rail. All of those things require capital, and they have budgets. And if we are able to be more effective in the way that we deliver infrastructure, we can do more of that stuff. And so it's a slightly different discussion from the negative implications of automation on the workforce to, in an industry that's significantly less technologically advanced, where are there opportunities for us to deliver insights and technology that let us do more at a cheaper cost? And I'll fast forward a bit to some of the messages later on, which is it's not so much about automation in this industry. It's about delivering basic technology. And there's a handful of industries just like this, where if we're able to leverage the tools and systems that other industries are already using and that we're developing every day, we can make a really positive impact on the world. So with that context, McKinsey believes that there's an opportunity to reduce the costs of major projects, and by these we mean anything over $1 billion, by 20 to 45% over the course of the next couple decades. But in order to capitalize, we have to figure out who's leading in this area and where should we be spending more of our dollars, our thinking, and where should we be pushing, either as investors or as contractors, as owners. The entire ecosystem has to work together for this to be effective. So again, I know we're going to zoom a little bit into one specific industry here, the infrastructure industry, engineering, big construction, but I think there's a lot of lessons that come out of this session that are applicable to other industries that are similar. So the first message here is, let's focus on the right side of this slide, and I apologize, I don't know if everybody can see this, but the average cost overrun for a major project is 80%. So if something has an original budget of $10 billion, a big public project, it, on average, comes in at $18 billion. It's also 20 months behind, and 98% of projects are somehow over budget. So again, just coming back to the video we just watched about the need for infrastructure globally, imagine how much more we could get done if we're able to address some of these things. So on the left-hand side of the page, we see an interesting phenomenon. Over the course of the last 20 years, productivity in this industry has flatlined. And you can see a couple of others. The total economy is in the middle, which has seen 60% improvement. The manufacturing industry has seen almost 100% improvement. And so one important message here, the labor productivity that we see here, it's not about the labor itself, it's about the ecosystem that sits around it. How is this industry leveraging tools and systems and partnerships and supply chains that facilitate frontline improvements in the way that projects are delivered? So the left side is really just the outcome of all of these other things that are going on that are limiting the effectiveness of major projects. So we have done a bunch of research to understand what the core underlying drivers of this are, and you see some of them here on the page. You can see technology is the biggest one in and of itself, but in reality, technology is an enabler or an element of all of these other ones that we see on the page. We could show this in 5 different ways, but the correlation between driving technology through a business and productivity improvements is incredibly strong. So we can see here an interesting cut of all of this, and Laura, you mentioned this digitization index that McKinsey uses. The construction industry, for those who can't see, is at the very bottom of the list, just next to the hunting industry. And the reality is it's actually quite close between those two industries to compete for the bottom spot. So on the right-hand side of the page, you can see research and development investment by industry. And I think, again, zooming out to some of these other core economy industries, it's probably going to be those at the bottom half of this list that are going to surface to the top of your view. So this is a big problem. The industry is not producing as much as it could be. We globally have a big demand for infrastructure, and there's a huge opportunity to leverage technology. So what are we doing about that at this point? So leaders are starting to separate themselves. there is a lot of investment that's taking place into technologies to improve a piece of the delivery of a big project, whether, again, it's a bridge or a manufacturing plant. I won't go into the specifics of every little detail here, but I want to hit the point that, let's talk about a few of these. Production systems are, it's software systems that enable a crew to see what needs to be done within a day and understand in the first couple hours of the day, here is the step that we need to do to try to create more of a manufacturing-like process to improve the efficiency of delivering a project. Or at the bottom right, digital performance management. This is about taking a spreadsheet view of a project and turning it into a digital set of KPIs and metrics so that you can see in real time what's actually happening. So what historically has happened on a major project is that something will go wrong and it will be a month and a half before people realize what's actually happened. And whether it's a quality issue or whether it's something didn't arrive on site, this is a system that lets us see day by day what's actually happening. 5D BIM on the right-hand side is a modeling software that helps us build models in 3D and layer in time elements and cost elements. And so these are things that simply improve the effectiveness of a project. At the bottom left, we do have automated construction. And so I don't want to hide from that point. That is part of this. But when we come to that 20 to 45% improvement in infrastructure delivery, that's a very, very small percentage of that. The vast majority of it is from eliminating the rework that's associated with plans not matching what's actually happening in the field, from materials not being delivered to site and we don't know where they are, from equipment not being where it should be. So this ecosystem that's developing is intent on attacking some of those other pain points that every job site feels day to day. So I'm going to dive into a couple of these, and then we'll be able to turn this over for a little bit of discussion. So just to paint the picture of what some of these technologies look like. So the first is using drones to create precise millimeter level site maps so that we can understand what the topography looks like before getting out to the site. Another one is 3D modeling and virtual reality. So we can put on a headset in order to walk through the plant or the bridge, whatever it might be, before we actually start construction, preventing hazards, removing clashes where we've designed things on top of each other. And then the last one is using, kind of combining those two to be able to see what is actually happening in the field. Does it relate to the models that we've built previously? And I know I'm going very deep on this, but I just want to paint the picture of the kinds of technologies. And there's thousands of things just like this that in an industry like engineering and construction, the difference between success and some of the outcomes we saw early on is a company's ability to capture the advantages that are created by using some of these things. So, as I said, I mean, I would be remiss if we didn't mention some of the topics that we discussed this morning. And it's impossible to fully lay out all of the implications of this, certainly not in a slide with 6 bullets on it, but these are some of the factors that are driving this in this industry. And so the first is labor availability, and we alluded to this a little bit earlier, where a lot of the major construction that's happening in North America and around the world right now is in places where there's not historically been a large workforce. So some of the drive to deploy automated technologies, and on the next slide I'll get to what some of those are, has been driven by that. Labor productivity, we've talked about that one a bit, and we certainly talked about it this morning. the right side of the page, eliminating the low-skill, repetitive tasks and trying to free up crews to focus on things that are higher value add will increase the overall productivity of the team. And then the last one, rework avoidance, I think is a real one as well. That there, of course, as in anything, is some human error. So this is what drives some of the companies that operate in this space to deploy some of these technologies. And specific ones, so there's drones, there are autonomous vehicles, autonomous welders, autonomous excavation, but I only had 8 slides here, and I don't want to overemphasize by having one of the 8 be focused on this. This really is a tiny piece of what's going on. It's something that people talk about quite a bit, but I think that the big opportunities in the areas that we certainly encourage our clients to focus on are those in some of the other pieces of the ecosystem that we described earlier. So I'll close by saying this is a rapidly changing landscape. I think as in any piece of the economy today, technology is daily changing the way we think about things. But in my experience, in our experience, it really is about the companies, and that's why I kept mentioning the micro from the morning session. There are some companies that are incorporating these technologies into their business models, and there are some that are not. And being careful not to make any investment suggestions or anything like that. I think what we're seeing, and we have seen in other industries that are further ahead in their digital journey, is that those that lean into these kind of topics are those that tend to succeed. And again, coming back to the bigger picture of the video that we watched earlier, those are the ones that I get excited about because they're able to address some of these bigger challenges, and they're the ones that are going to help bring down the cost structure, provide the schedule certainty to let us build the kind of infrastructure that we want to talk about. So I'll pause there.
Great, thank you. Really interesting presentation and obviously a lot of implications. We do have some questions from the board. Ms. Brown?
Thank you. So this is right up my alley. I do school construction for a living, and as a matter of fact, if we go back to the slide that says there are 80% cost overruns and the projects are behind 20 months, we'd never have kids in schools, and we'd be in a lot of trouble. So it's very interesting that you finally told me that these are billion-dollar projects and it's from around the world. It'd be interesting to see what the numbers for the United States look like. But I do want to say that my projects range anywhere from several $1 million to several $100 million, and we already, in school districts around this state, incorporate all these measures except for the lighter, the as-built verification, because it's very expensive and we don't necessarily need to do that. And maybe some of the reasons for that is we do something called continuous inspection combined with the state architect and licensed state inspectors that don't allow these errors to happen and don't allow things to get built and have to do rework. So maybe some of these multinational corporations can learn something from the state school construction program and the state architect on how to build. I'd be happy to give a workshop on that. Because we are doing most of this already, and we're talking about small to medium-sized contractors here throughout the state, and we are not making these big mistakes because kids wouldn't be in schools. We wouldn't have the facilities for them ready to go. So I'd be happy to teach the international marketplace something about how to build.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. I had a question that I realized I can't ask because it's an investment question, so never mind.
Okay.
But you had said a couple of things that I had a question on. Labor availability in areas where there's not a lot of labor in these big projects. Can you go into that a little bit for me?
Yeah. The biggest example of that, and I recognize this is a slightly controversial topic, but The biggest example of that over the last 10 years is probably the need for energy infrastructure driven by the fracking boom. So there was, at one point, very, very little in certain parts of Montana and North Dakota where the Bakken Shale is, and there was a huge dislocation that took place
I remember, yeah.
trying to pull the workforce
Wasn't
to...
that North Dakota too, where they were like paying people to go?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So, so that's a big one. It was a bit more time-bound. Another one that's going on still today, and again, related a bit to that, is low natural gas prices have improved the competitiveness of many U.S. chemicals and industrial businesses. And so there's a big boom on the Gulf Coast right now to build new infrastructure, whether it's power infrastructure, chemical infrastructure, industrial plants, all of which benefit from lower gas prices. So even in an area like that where you have Houston, you have New Orleans, there's still an opportunity for, there's still an issue.
So you're saying, sounds to me like in Houston and New Orleans, though, you're talking about lack of experienced workers in those fields. Is that what you're talking about?
That's right. I mean, that's a big piece of it. It kind of spans the entire maturity level of the organization or seniority level of a construction organization.
Of the construction organization? Yeah. I think we talked about it earlier about having apprenticeships and stuff. Might be a good idea for that.
Yes.
And then you had said there are some companies doing it, some not. I don't know if you have any figures, it's probably not available, but there are all these different kinds of technological advances. What are the numbers of who's using what?
Yeah.
Is one more popular than the other?
Yeah. Let me flip to the slide that had a handful of them on it. I think we mentioned it this morning. Bigger companies have the capability to, and have the financial capability to invest, there we go, to invest more in these technologies. And so I would say the general rule is that the big engineering construction companies, the big owners organizations, so the entities that own the infrastructure that's being developed are doing more of it. But there are pockets of small innovative companies that are doing fantastic things that are seeing the writing on the wall and moving in this direction. So
You don't know. Yeah, and I kind of asked, sorry about that. So these larger companies, so if you look at this slide, would be using most of this already?
No one is using all of it, and
Okay.
I think that's the message. So I think there's different levels of all of these things, and this, again, with one bullet on a page, doesn't give the full description of what the most innovative version of each one of these is. But I think what's been particularly interesting about this industry relative to a lot of others was it came late to this game. I think that there were industries that were much further ahead, which is, creates obviously the opportunities that we discussed at the beginning about project outcomes not being as good as they could be. But the flip side is it does let them make the shift a lot faster than industries that were at the bleeding edge of technology. So we're seeing more and more entities within this space starting to invest real dollars. If you go to engineering and construction conferences these days, this is the topic. Yeah, this is all people want to talk about. And even 3 years ago, no one wanted to talk about this. So the pace of innovation is quite strong right now, but nobody's cracked the code.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slayton.
Thank you. Both these presentations, both the topic areas have been quite interesting. In this particular one, and maybe Ted, you might want to weigh in on the issue I'm going to raise, which is my understanding, at least historically, one of the things that CalPERS has avoided when it comes to infrastructure investment is hesitancy about completion risk. So once a project is built, the pro forma is there, you know, it becomes pretty easy, kind of cookie cutter for us to do the evaluation, but it's that completion risk. So my question is, given these technological changes, does it not only change the cost structure, but does it change the completion risk profile? And if so, does that change our attitude toward potentially investing earlier in these kinds of projects?
I'll jump in first.
Please.
On that side. So, yeah, you're exactly right. You know, the greenfield risk shows up in this other slide. You know, the 80% cost overruns and time overruns and all the rest, which really lead investors to price in that very risk into their pro formas in order to be compensated for that risk. For institutional investors, many times infrastructure and real estate sit within the portion of the portfolio that is looking for low risk, income-oriented, diversifying streams of capital versus equity risk. But as these new technologies and data improved processes come in place, yeah, the risk reward of these type of projects are going to shift over time, and the market will start to price each of these projects accordingly and shift. If the risk is less, then the required rate of return is going to come down. There'll be more capital that's available for more construction development oriented projects if it's perceived and in actuality is less uncertain.
So just a follow-on question to that. So does that mean that it changes the skill sets that we need to evaluate and to make the determination of this is a good one, this one's not so good?
That was exactly the question I was looking forward to asking the panel, which is both on the, you know, how do you start measuring individual companies on their advancement along this drive, and then the other side of the coin as well. How do you measure their ability to manage the human capital side of the equation? Some are better or worse than managing the disruption, and those are two areas we'd be really interested in measuring.
Yes, very, very interesting question, and I think the reality is no one has cracked this yet. So again, I don't want to step too far out onto the bridge here, but I don't think we could say today that there's a large enough fact base where we can change our investing model right now, where that would be, at least immediately, the approach I would probably think of. With that being said, I do think that there's a lot we can learn. And whether it's public statements that companies are making about where they're investing. So what I always look for is, in this industry or other industries in which I get involved, I try to figure out what are the 10 or 12 technologies that really make a difference. Which companies are talking about those right now? Which ones can I somehow figure out they are deploying those technologies, or they're at least testing them? And in general, the companies want to share that information because they're proud of it, and it's something that they want out in the public realm. In this industry specifically, I think that there's the proof is going to be in the pudding, and a $1 billion project has a couple-year life cycle at least. So it's not something we're going to know immediately, but hopefully we start seeing the declines in prices. Each of these metrics on the right-hand side of the page starts to shift, and we can look at individual companies to understand which ones are doing that effectively and which ones are not. And again, it's both the contractors, but also the owners. So any company that's in a capital-intensive business that's building big plants or big developments, you can track how they're performing.
I might just add, you know, I forget whether this was in the McKinsey report or not, so I might have been reading a different report, but a good example that we look at is Berkshire Hathaway's purchase investment into Clayton Homes in the early 2000s, a manufactured housing company, which was really forward-thinking at that point in time, and many of many of the trends that's listed on deploying new innovations in this area is occurring in a company like Clayton Homes, and seeing how some of these trends are playing out within investments in the public arena as well. I think Clayton Homes is one of the McKinsey report. But
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Yeah, on your slide 5, it's just a clarification, a question really. Looking at the ranking of the digitalization, and I noticed that the index is 2015, and I'm just wondering if we're seeing these technologies change before our eyes, because I was just looking at the transportation and warehousing with the Amazons and the UPSs and the FedExes using these big warehouses, and transportation, Uber, Lyft, and I was just wondering, is it currently now higher on the scale?
Yeah, I mean, that is a very, very good question. So, of course, this is going to shift. I have not seen an updated version of this. I think there's enough required in order to do this that we only do it every few years. But let me get back to you and see if I can find a more up-to-date version of this one.
Okay, thank you.
It's about time.
Yeah.
We can all say.
Change again.
Thank you.
For my discussions, though, where I talk about this industry, I like having construction at the bottom
It
because
may be at the bottom, but it may be that they're all moving up.
If you can use your microphone, yeah. Okay, Ms. Paquin.
Thank you. I'm curious, as you start to see the shift toward more automation and the loss of low-skilled construction jobs, are you starting to see labor unions being part of this conversation and looking at skills training for their membership?
So, to date, I don't think we're seeing what you're describing in this industry. There are technologies emerging that have the potential to lead to the disruptions that you're talking about, but at least I'm not aware of large-scale labor losses in this industry. So, and again, coming back to the video at the beginning, the demand for infrastructure going forward is so large that it's not a zero-sum game where we have a small number of projects, and if things change, there's going to be a large amount of labor losses. At least as we see it today, that it just reduces the cost of delivering a big project, which lets us do another one and another one and another one. So I don't actually see that as a big part of the dialogue today, at least in this industry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Well, I want to thank you for a really interesting discussion and for really helping us to understand some of the technology that is and innovation that's going to help us change tomorrow's business landscape. I want to thank also Ted and you and your team for putting these panels together. I think they've been really top-notch and very informative and helpful. Before we move on to lunch, we do have 3 members of the public who wish to speak. So I'd invite you to come up to the microphone, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. In order, Armando Nunez, Hicks, I think, and Susan Weber.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Armando Nunez. I'm a union carpenter from San Diego, California. I represent a little bit over 5,000 union members in San Diego, but indirectly I represent just over 20,000 non-union carpenters that don't have a voice that are working currently in San Diego. And what I wanted to address is one of your investment properties, which is the 4th and J project down in San Diego. What's going on down there is we have a general contractor who is, I guess, for profit inviting these non-union contractors, and one of them, Baker Concrete, who is currently working on the project, and they're almost done, so we're not expecting a whole lot of change there, but that's somebody who's brought their workforce primarily out of Arizona and out of Texas, undermining our local economy. Now, what we're concerned about is the next scope of work, which is the drywall, and it's a large size of the project. Jumping into your responsible contractor policy. So the policy states that it's got to be based on local market conditions.
Now, what nobody knows and what nobody sees is that the local market condition in a residential project like this one is full of cash pay, workers being 1099, and also undocumented workers, which really get the most abuse. So we've been in contact with Ms. Douglas and had a number of dialogue about it, and it seems promising. But we're hoping to reach out and bring it to the board's attention of what's really happening and what continues to happen. So when a contractor that we know is responsible tries to bid against these non-responsible contractors, really they're deemed non-competitive by your managers. Why? Because the number appears to be number, but it's artificially inflated just based on the number of non-responsible contractors that are being invited to bid. So also the second part of this is none of the responsible contractors want to even invest and spend the money on an estimator to put a number together when they know they don't have a chance of even being awarded the project. So Doug is going to continue seeing, I see kind of my time's running out, but kind of wanted to take the chance to address, one of the biggest problems as well is the lack of apprenticeship programs. So we see this underground economy, these guys have no training, their quality is low, the safety is low, the wages are extremely low compared to what the market conditions are. So when I heard your presentation talking about the lack of training, I mean, that is also a contributing factor of why there's a lack of skilled tradespeople in the industry.
Thank you. Sorry, your time has expired. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Doug. I am a career carpenter. I spent about 20 years with a hammer in my hand. So when I talk about construction, this has been my way of life. That's all I've known. I'm a second-generation carpenter at that. What you build is an investment. How you build it, that is your legacy to the community you're working in. And when I see projects like 4th and J, they've already had one non-responsible contractor removed from the project in West Coast Drywall. They were already awarded the project and had to be removed. That is not a reflection of this board's responsible contractor policy or CalPERS values overall. I would urge you to take a strong look at how people are being qualified. When you talk about it, a contractor must be competitive in the local market condition. A responsible contractor is now competing with a criminal contractor, and you're asking a responsible contractor with a dedication to education, to a retirement with some dignity for the men and women that are making this massive structure that's going to create generational levels of wealth. It can't be done. A cash pay contractor starts with a 30 to 40% advantage at bid time. They are not paying payroll taxes. They are not paying anything that they should, workman's comp. It's all avoided. So when you're asking for a competitive price, please take into effect that you're asking somebody who does it right to compete with a criminal. It cannot be done. And so I would ask you to take a strong look at this 4th and J project. It is an opportunity for CalPERS as a board to send a strong and clear message to their fund managers. We will not fund criminal enterprises. We will stand behind our responsible contractor policy. If it's not being followed, there will be a price to be paid. That CalPERS values and morals are reflected through their selection of contractors. Thank you. Oh, one other thing. When you talk about an institutional dedication to education, that's how you can track a contractor who's going to survive in the future. Their best asset is not the projects, it's the people that make them. I've worked on hundreds of millions of dollars worth of projects, schools, prisons, hospitals. I barely graduated high school, but I received my BIM training in 2007, back when BIM was still something that only architects used. So if you'd like to track a contractor who absolutely will succeed, find somebody with an institutional dedication to education of their workforce. That is the contractor that will prove to be profitable and long-term sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Weber.
Thanks so much. Just a couple short comments. One, with all these different McKinsey slides, and as an ex-McKinsey person, I was a little distressed to see you treat this as a single industry when in fact your first slide said that it was, I believe, energy, construction, and infrastructure, or real estate, energy, infrastructure, and real estate, per Board Member Brown's comment. There are There's quite a good bit of technology being used now in the real estate industry. There's also, at least in the real estate industry, where a lot of what happens on the site still remains final assembly, but a lot of the automation or implementation of technology has actually happened at an earlier stage. You used to have windows fitted out a lot more at sites than they are now for single-family homes and multifamily. You see a lot of the windows come to sites prefab, so you have sort of an illusory capturing of where the productivity gains are happening because of the material, it's embodied in the materials that show up to what looks like materials that show up to the site. The second point, I just wanted to address the exchange between Mr. Slayton and Mr. Eliopoulos on the implications for CalPERS infrastructure policy. And again, we're all assuming that 80% slide, that with the 80% cost overruns and the other figures, are probably based on infrastructure. I would assume that that's one of the places where you could get better data. It would be hard for me to think that would include real estate because it would be hard if you get access to that data. But in any event, one of the reasons that infrastructure projects run over time and budget is a function of the whole flawed incentives in the bidding process. For instance, in toll roads, it's almost guaranteed that a toll road project will go bankrupt. And my understanding is that CalPERS has only participated in toll road investments in actually buying into bankrupt projects when the costs are known, when everything's been shaken out. So I'm not sure that to the exchange, if the cost overruns are significantly a function of bad incentives in the bidding process, technology is not going to fix that. So I'm not sure that the implications for CalPERS infrastructure investments are as profound as you might think from seeing these slides.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the end of this session. Again, thank you very much to our panelists for a truly illuminating session. We're going to take a 1-hour break for lunch now. We'll return at 1:30 when we'll start our discussion about sustainable development and investment. Thanks, everyone.